All right, sorry about that. You should be able to hear me now. So, today, it's just a great start. Oh, golly. Today, your lesson's on Scatterplots, and you can be working independently, but if you want some help with it, you can take a look here. So, this is the lesson here. We can look at that. And we're talking about scatterplots. And the scatterplot's just a kind of graph, and you've probably done them a bunch in the past, but if you haven't, that's okay. We're going to get a chance to do them now. The idea with a scatterplot is that it's a graph that has some numbers down here and some numbers going up here. And then you put a bunch of dots on it, and each dot really means you can measure two pieces of information from it. There's this left and right number and this up and down number. So you can learn two things about it. So for example, I could make a scatter plot that was about the age of children and their height. And so if I put a dot here, really, what I'd be measuring is I would know from the left to right how old it was. And then I would know by measuring up and down how tall it was. And so each point on a scatter plot gives you two pieces of information. So if that seems a little weird, well, don't worry about it. Let's try actually doing it. So the first thing we want to know is that anytime we make a scatter plot, we're always going to put the first column along the bottom. We call this the x-axis, but I'm not so worried about you knowing it's called the x-axis. Just know that we always put the first column on the bottom, and we put the second column going up and down. There's nothing magical about that. That's just so we always do it the same way. So we call the left and right axis the x-axis and the up and down one the y-axis. But I'm not so worried about that. Just know that whenever we make a graph, we read these numbers along the bottom and these longer numbers along the side going up and down. And that helps us. So let's try actually putting these on a graph. So if we look here, and if I want to put this first point here on the graph, well, it tells me that it has an x value of 1, which means I need to count along the bottom here until I get to 1. And my point is going to be somewhere on this line that goes up and down. And that tells me that has a y value of 8. I'm going to replace this graph for you guys because that was silly, because 8 would live up here. But that's okay. You're going to have a nice clean graph where that is on there. And so I would take this and I'd say we go up from here and over from there. And where those points meet, I would put a dot. Where those points meet, that's where I'm going to put my first point, just like that. Then I'd be ready to put my second point on, this one here. And for this one here, we'll make a red dot maybe, and our x value is at 2. So it's going to be somewhere up on this line. And our y value is at 6. So it's going to be somewhere along this line. And where those 2 points meet, that's where we put our dot. Just like that. Except I said that would be a red dot, so we'll make it red. Maybe I'll put a blue dot at our next point. And again, we look along the bottom, and the x value is 3. So it's going to be somewhere up this line. And our y value is 4. So it's going to be across from here. And where those two lines meet, that's where that point would go. And maybe I'll use green for this one here. This one has an x value of 4, which means that it's going to be somewhere on this line. It has a y value of 2, which means it's going to be somewhere on that line. And that means that this point has to live right here. Make a note, yeah, I mean, you do not need to color coordinate these. I just find it helpful, so I kind of, after the fact, can know what I'm looking at. I'm going to use orange for this last point. And this last one has an x value at 5, which means it's going to come up from here. It has a y value of 0, which means it's going to lie right along there. So this point is actually going to be right on this line, right there. And there we go. Those are the points for the first graph. And you can go to the end of this page and see, and it will show you what they should look like. So you can check and make sure that you got yours correct. Good. All right, let's look at the second page. And pause and try this yourself if you can. I'm not going to do all of them here with you because the answer is on the next. But just to show you kind of what we're looking at, this is baseball, and we want to compare, see if there's a relationship between hits and RBIs. In other words, is there a relationship between how often a player hits the ball and how often they put a run in, they help their team score. So our first player here, Bo Bichette, shortstop, he had 191 hits. And we're going to have to do our best guess here, but 150, 160, 170, 180, 190. So 191 is going to be around about there. I could use a ruler if I wanted to be neat, of course. That'd be a better idea. 191 would live right about there. And then he had 102 RBIs. So that's going to be, you know, just above the 100 line here, because this counts by tens. Oh man, my ruler doesn't want to go straight. So right about there. And where those two lines meet, that's where we'd put our point for Bo Bichette. And now we've got him on there. And again, you do not have to color code these, but just if you're coming and looking at this after the fact, it'll help you. So then Vladimir Guerrero, he had 188 hits. That's almost as many, just shy of 190. So he's going to be somewhere around about there for hits. And he had 188 or 111 RBIs. So he actually had more than Bo Bichette. And 111 would probably fit right about there. So that's 111. And what was his? 188. And so where those two lines meet, that's where I draw my point. I don't actually want to keep all the lines because that would get really messy. I'll do two more. Marcus Semien. It's right here, and he had 173 hits. So that's 150, 160, 170. 173 should live more or less there. And he had 102 RBIs, which is the exact same amount as our first guy. So we'll go that there, and we'll say that's his point there. And again, I don't actually want to keep these lines on here. And then just to show you, something on the other end of the spectrum, maybe we'll put Kevin Biggio here. And he had 56 hits. Which would live more or less about there. And he had only 27 RBIs. So 10, 20, not quite 30, so 27 might be about there. 56 and 27. So that's where he would live. And you could keep putting them on till you've got them all on. So again, I'm not going to put them all on here, but that's a good kind of little example. And just like last time, if we go to the end of the page, we can check and see that our graph should look like this graph. Once you've done that, I want you to answer some questions. So look back at the graph you've made and say, would it be fair to say that players who have more hits usually have more runs batted in? And why do you think that? So give me a nice answer here. Make sure you use sentences when you do that. We like nice clear answers that, use full sentences. Oh, sorry, accidentally closed one note there. And I'll go through the last example there too, but I just want to stress that all I'm trying to really get today is to see that you can put a graph onto the page, but then also that you can do a little bit of interpretation, that you can kind of look at that graph and tell me what you think it means. Which is important. That's an important skill too. Not just looking at a graph, but not just making a graph, but looking at a graph and kind of interpreting what that graph is telling you. So give me a nice full sentence answer here. And then from there, give me a full sentence answer for that question and for all these questions, really. Will be time well spent. And then we can look at a last example. And this is a neat example. This is real data. A few years ago, I taught at a school in Smithville. And, as a teacher, I have to keep track of students' attendance. So for this class, I have their attendance data, and I have their final grades. And so what we want to look at here is we want to make a graph and see, is there a relationship between how much school these kids missed and what their grade was in my class? So let's take a look. Again, I'm not going to put them all in, but just to make sure we know how we're reading this, let's say I put this kid in here. Well, he only missed 2 days, so that's going to be a line up here. And his mark was 72%, and that's going to be 60, 65, 70, 72 would live about there. So that's going to be that fellow right there. This next kid missed a lot more, 11 days, which would be right here. And their mark was straight up a 50. So if we look where 11 and 50 meet, we can go across with 50. We can go up with 11, and we get a mark right there. We'll do 2 more just to show you. We had another kid who missed 7 days. So 7 would be there. And his mark was 55, which better than 50, but still not the greatest mark I've ever given. That's okay. He was a lovely kid. I actually know exactly who that is. I was a big fan. But I think he probably could have got a better grade than 55 if he'd done his work. And so you can keep going and keep putting everybody in here until you've got all the kids on the graph. And then you can look at that and you can answer these questions. Does it seem like kids who miss more class do better, worse, or the same as kids who miss less class? And why do you think that? And again, I want you to use the graph to answer that question. Is there something looking at those points that gives you a sense of if there's a relationship there, if it makes a difference how much class you miss? Don't just tell me what you think in general, but tell me what you think looking at the actual data of the actual kids I taught. So I hope that helps. I'm here to help you. If you need some help, come and get me. Carl's here to help you if you need some help. And